Damon Williams can be the Big Ten's best quarterback in 2025.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And this episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKDOWNCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Now, Lars, just a quick reminder to all the everydayers out there, wherever you get this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, make sure to click that subscribe button, click the little bell as well so you don't miss when we post a new video. If you're on the audio side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as all that really does help us out a lot. We've got a really fun show coming at all the everydayers today. We're going to talk about why Washington is taking 5, 6, 7, whatever number it ends up being, of defensive backs in the 2026 class, and why it's a really good idea. We'll get to that in a little bit. We're also going to do a Locked On Huskies signature and talk about some of our favorite bold predictions, but we'll get to that in a little bit because we'll get to all that after. Really fun conversation. So Jim Rome has Jedd Fisch on the show the other day, and Jedd, being the, ever confident man that he is, goes on, and Jim Rome asks him about Damon Williams Jr. And Jedd says, yeah, that Sun Bowl performance, that's his floor going into 2025. So, I mean, we're not going to read too much into that and have, over the moon expectations. But with that being said, what is Damon Williams' ceiling in 2025? Because I legitimately believe that it's the best quarterback in the Big Ten.
So I agree with the assessment. God bless Jedd. That's one thing I love about him is you will always get a good quote. There is never a bad quote that comes from Jedd. Good, bad, or indifferent. And sometimes, we just kind of, chuckle and, we just go on about our day. Anyways, but that being said, he's absolutely right that Damon has a very high ceiling. I don't necessarily, I just want to push back a little bit. I don't think that's his floor. And now as we talked about before the show, my floor would be the Oregon game, not particularly for Damon's fault in the result and the 10 sacks and all that, but just kind of the overall feel of that game. That would be his floor. Most, again, not Damon's fault, but still that's his floor. The ceiling is higher than what the Louisville game ended up being, but from a production standpoint, you can't get much better. And so you understand what Jedd's saying, hey, if that's his floor, imagine what his ceiling could be. Where I said, okay, what's his ceiling? Heisman? We've already been saying that. Again, I said even out the far. No, but next you're probably thinking 26 Heisman for, that's when that conversation as a junior to a full 4 years starting, 2 years under his belt playing, that would be when that expectation would come into play. But there's plenty of reasons to believe that Damon will be the best quarterback in the Big Ten. The question is, will the pieces around him allow that to come to fruition this year, or more so 2026 and possibly 2027?
So I feel like, not only can we not look that far down the line, because, with the transfer portal, who might come in, all that sort of stuff, but we're also sitting here looking at this team and saying you have 2 preseason All-Americans on your roster. One at running back in Jonah Coleman and another wide receiver in Denzel Boston. So you have the proper playmakers in order to take that big step forward this season. And you and I and Jedd and this coaching staff and really a lot of members of the national media are starting to catch on to this of Damon has all the talent necessary to take that big step forward in 2025. And, you're not going to rank him ahead of a guy like Drew Aller when you talk about Big Ten quarterback rankings, because that's just unfair where, it's somebody who has 2 starts under his belt. You're not ranking that ahead of a guy who has 2, 3, 4 years of starting experience under his belt. So from that aspect, we're not going that far and saying, hey, he is the best quarterback in the Big Ten. But if by the end of the year, we're looking back on it and saying, yeah, he performed at that level, I don't think you or I are going to be shocked. And we spent so much time through spring practice, through the offseason, talking about the physical traits that make him such an intriguing prospect and give him that very, very high ceiling that you're alluding to, where it is the phenomenal arm talent. It's the elite rushing ability, the top end speed where, Jedd will always call him one of the fastest, if not the fastest player on the field. All of that is great. But I think what we're really going to see just Damon set himself apart with this year is his ability to keep his eyes downfield, his scrambling ability, his ability to make plays outside of the pocket with his arm and not just with his legs, where, it's something I feel like I've seen a lot of discourse just in terms of the general Twitterverse with guys like Lamar Jackson and Johnny Manziel and those sorts of players. And I'm not trying to compare Damon to anybody in that regard, but I think that one thing that Damon has at this point in his career that I think some of those guys especially took a little bit longer to really see, where, Johnny was his own just magical sort of playmaker. But the thing that always I will come back to with Damon that really stood out to me when we first saw him as a true freshman last spring, that continues to impress me day in and day out, and why I fully believe he can achieve whatever it is that his goals are at the quarterback position, is his maturity, his understanding of defenses, and his ability to keep his eyes downfield. And it's at such a young age, that's not something we see a lot of quarterbacks do. And moving forward, I'm really excited to see, with just more familiarity with the offense, with a better offensive line in front of him, I think those things are only going to continue to grow.
And the reason for that is you touched on, first of all, none of the things you said are wrong, but you touched on the maturity. It's the intangibles for me. Like, you can see everything of, like, just from a football playing perspective, why Damon is successful on the field. Like you said, knows how to read defense, is able to, be a run and pass threat, know when to tuck it, when to pull it. But from the moment I met him last February, March, even before they got up to spring practices, you can sense a kid who was, I don't want to say developed, but understands the assignment, understands what he's getting into. The moment's not too big for him. And it's one of the key traits that Jedd recruits in his quarterbacks. And we here with Derek Samuel, playing at MetLife at 4 years old, 5 years old. Like, yeah, stage probably ain't going to be too big for the guy. Like, that was always the sense that I got from Damon. And I think, we absolutely saw him have a little bit of happy feet last season, but almost worked to his benefit. The UCLA game comes to mind, where I swear he wasn't even more in the pocket for a second and a half. Goes right up the open seam, breaks it off for, I think, 15 to 20-yard gain. That's a good, kind of quick read there. But, ideally you want him to be a pocket passer first, and things that Jedd talks about. For all the intangible reasons that he's going to be able to achieve the on-field success, because, he's grounded, he still is going to work at it. He's a guy that isn't going to take it for granted. He just, when I ask him, like, what is it like watching film? He's like, I'm not, a grinder or whatever. I kind of just go over it once, go over it a second time. You're always finding something to look for in your film. And in a way, you don't want to put the expectation on him, but kind of reminded me of Michael Penix, where a guy who he knows the second that ball, even before it goes out of his hand, he knows the mistake he just made, even before the DB makes it, or maybe it just falls incomplete and you dodge a bullet. But it's, hey, like that, I can't make that throw again. And we even saw that from Damon as a true freshman. He never really made the same mistake twice. Mike never made the same mistake twice. That's a sign of a good quarterback, and that's a quarterback who's grounded, who knows, like, this is why Damon came to Washington last season and sat behind Will Rogers. Was like, hey, yeah, you're going to have not 4 years, but you're going to have guaranteed 3 years, and, probably 2, depending on how well you do and things like that. But Damon, like, all the keys are there and all the traits are there for him to completely cash in over the next 2 to 3 years, especially this fall.
And that's the biggest thing, where the last thing I wanted to say on this was, I think that it's something where you and I can talk about this, because not only did we get to see it last year, up close and personal, but it's something that we got to see a little bit in 2022 and in 2023 as well. It's how a quarterback with Damon's skill set works inside of Jedd Fisch's offense. And it's something you and I talked about a little bit last season, where Will Rogers was like, he was a perfectly serviceable quarterback for the role that he was asked to play. But in terms of what is needed to maximize a Jedd Fisch offense is somebody like Damon Williams. And I don't think we've seen what that can truly look like. And I think that it's going to look a little bit different when we get out there this fall in terms of, maybe some of the running plays and some of the different things that you can do in terms of play action and bootleg, and some of the things that Jedd has talked about, saying we have adjusted the offense accordingly to make sure that it fits Damon Williams the best. And he talks about watching, Josh Allen and Jaden Daniels and Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, some of those other guys where, the NFL, they do a really good job of maximizing a system that plays to their talents. And I'm just curious to see what Jedd can do with that at Washington, because I think he's already got a really nice baseline in terms of just his playbook itself. And then having just such a unique talent like Damon can really take it over the top. But Lars, we got to talk some recruiting. And on the other side of the break, we're going to give some of our, I was going to say famous, but they're certainly not, just our Locked On Huskies staple bold predictions. And we'll get to that right after a message from our friends over at Rugiet. Guys, you've probably heard of Viagra or Cialis, maybe you've even tried them. But if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rugiet Ready. Rugiet Ready is a next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pills that can take hours, Rugiet's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue and kicks in fast, on average in 15 minutes. Effects can last up to 36 hours, so you can stay confident and in control when the moment is right. If traditional options haven't worked, Rugiet might be the answer. Over 150,000 men have already made the switch. You can even read real customer reviews on their site. It's helping a lot of people feel more confident and present in the moment. Head to Rugiet.com/LockdownCollege and use code LockdownCollege to get 15% off today. That's RUGIET.com/LockdownCollege and use promo code LockdownCollege for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, or manufacturing review. Please visit the Rugiet website for full safety information. So, Lars, famous is certainly the wrong word to use when we talk about bold predictions on this here podcast. But I would certainly say they're a staple of what we do here. So we're going to have a lot of fun, and we wanted to talk about some of the biggest recruiting wins, after having to go through the concerns that we have along the defensive line on Monday's show. We want to talk about some of the positives, some of the wins that we can possibly see coming down UW's way in the future. And I think for me, I wanted to start with the one that I think would be the most impactful in terms of highest rank, different things like that. And I think that would be Davon Benjamin. I think I just really like where Washington stands with him.
So Davon Benjamin, a guy is that no matter what the number is, which we're talking about in Thursday, like how many guys you're taking, whether you're taking 1, 2, even 3, like you could say 2 defensive backs, Davon Benjamin is always going to be a take for you. And when you think about, just West Coast defensive backs in general, obviously, like you got 1 4-star in Jeron Jones, but this is a top 50, top arguably 20 player in the class in terms of just
borderline 5-star on the 247 composite. Yeah.
And I was gonna say I didn't know what number nowadays is the actual cutoff.
35 on the composite. Yeah.
Again, I remember back in the day when it was like 15, it was 10, it was like but again, Davon Benjamin would still be in that same potential discussion. That's why and so when you talk about biggest wins, if you're able to have a class of Davon Benjamin and 3 or 4 other guys, that's why Davon Benjamin's name is at the top, because of his ability to be a shutdown cornerback, but also still hold up in the run game. And a guy that you just seem – you don't want to say plug and play because, again, I want to see how Dylan Robinson – I know they're not the same height, but just I want to see how that caliber of a freshman can come in this system with Ryan Walters. Because if Dylan Robinson can pick it up quickly, I have no doubt that Davon Benjamin could as well.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think one of the reasons that I wanted to lead off with him is I think that Washington is sitting in a great spot here. I think that Oregon might have been a little bit concerned that he ended up taking the visit where, of course, they want to lock him down on that official visit. And they do have the crystal ball right now to pick up his services. But I think that in terms of everything Washington is able to offer off the field as well, not just in terms of NIL and resources and things like that, but just in terms of the competition and what that room looks like in 2026 and beyond, it's something where, we talked about it with Brandon Arrington and what that selling point could have potentially been. All of those same things hold true for Davon Benjamin, where if that's a guy who thinks he can get on the field really, really early in his career, and I would certainly, back up that assertment because he is a very, very high level prospect in terms of where his development is right now. I think that Washington can offer that for him, where I look at the outside corners in 2026, and I fully believe, and I'm going to continue to say this, that Leroy Bryant and Dylan Robinson will be your starters on the outside. But it's one of those things where, it's why Jeron Jones was so high on Washington, why he eventually ended up committing. And it's why Washington has done a really good job going out and grabbing more outside corners like Elijah Durr, and why they're still in the market for one more is you want to reload that position. And you really like guys like Darian Clemens, Ramon Adams, Elias Johnson, those who are already in the room. But it's about stacking and improving talent every single year. And that's what grabbing Davon Benjamin does. So it's no slight to anybody else to say you want to go get one of, if not arguably the best corner in the country. And I just think that this is something where on top of that, another thing you and I want to get to later on is he plays safety for Oaks Christian right now. And Ryan Walters loves to move his defensive backs around and put them in really opportune situations. So if he plays a little bit outside corner, a little bit of safety at the next level, I think Washington is in a really unique position to sell that So that's one thing that I'm really curious about there. I just know that there are a couple other guys that you and I wanted to get to, and to get back to the defensive line, there's a flip target you have in mind.
Again, from the day that he committed to Ohio State, I said, Khary Wilder, okay, great. Talk to me in December. And the more that we were actually thinking about it before the show, the reason why it kind of came to mind was, do you remember the name Hiro Kanu?
Of course, yeah.
So, again, a high-touted four-star. Yeah, no, I guess we're both nerds in that respect. But even so, a guy that came out of Rancho Santa Margarita years ago, you would have thought he would have been a guy that maybe in year 2 or 3 was like an impact starter at Ohio State, things like that with Larry Johnson. And this is no slight to Larry Johnson or Hiro, but if in year 4 or 5 you're kind of like a rotational piece, I wonder if I'm Khary Wilder, maybe I bet on myself and stay closer to home at Washington. And September 27th, looming large. I think if Washington's able to beat Ohio State, that'll certainly play some small factor in it. And I wonder if there's a few other things that between now, as the way they are, and signing day, and when he would actually enroll and things like that, things might be different. I will never rule out Colorado because we know how important the staff he was to the staff and is to the staff. I don't think even a guy that commits to Ohio State, you'd think, hey, we'll just give up. There's zero national championships for Oregon, zero chance that Washington gives up on Khary Wilder until his pen hits the paper for Ohio State and he signs on signing day. Because I think, there's something building defensively, but it's not fully there yet. And Khary Wilder, you can kind of understand why he might not jump in the boat, but Derek Coleman Brewster does, as a guy who's in state, where if Khary Wilder can see it on the field this season for Ryan Walters, then a few other things change. Then you could be looking at a much different equation.
So I absolutely agree. And, we've had a very, widely, just widely ranging discourse about this recruitment over the last couple of weeks, where I'm firmly in the camp of you never want to rely on flips. But you're right. This is somebody who has been at the top of Washington's board for a very, very long time. And you talk about not wanting to give up until signing day. This staff has shown that they will do that. And of course, it's just extra important when you've missed on other guys like Tristan Gibbons, like Fasciale, like David Schwartzel, to just continue to emphasize, hey, this is how important you are to us and to this scheme and to this defense and what you could turn into here at Washington from arguably day one. So I'm really curious to see how Washington can continue to do that. And on top of that, as Ohio State continues to do what they do best and stack classes and stack elite talent that they are churning out and developing for the NFL, that's something that, certainly gives me pause, but I understand why you want to go down that road. And I look at it and I say, there absolutely is a route here. I still think it's somewhat of a long shot, but it's worth discussing because of, everything you said and where Washington has stood on Khary Wilder for a long time. So that's something I certainly want to keep an eye on as we move forward. But one other guy that you and I want to keep an eye on that I think is going to be, we wanted to split this up into different categories here. The most important win, that's 4-star defensive tackle TI Umu-Cais. I feel like Washington's in a good spot in this recruitment as well, where, we just kind of look at where his last couple of weeks have been, visiting North Carolina, Colorado, and Colorado State. UCLA is in the mix as well. They also got a visit from him. I look at that group and I think Washington does have everything it needs to win out in terms of, again, NIL and all these are very important as well. But after the results of the last couple of weeks, whatever heat you did have on TI Umu-Cais, you don't want to pressure him and say, we need you to commit right now. But it's look at all these extra things that haven't gone our way, but they could also play to your benefit in the long run in terms of what we want you to do in our defense and what you can do for us and where your development might be. And I think that those are things that sounds like he wants to decide in the coming weeks or months. We'll see. We never want to put a decision timeline on those things unless a kid has said, hey, this is the day I'm committing. So I look at that recruitment and I think Washington's in a good spot. And I think that it certainly wouldn't absolve all of the concerns that you and I stated on our Monday show as the Everdares. No, but I think it would go a long way towards saying, all right, you're still able to land some of these top tier prospects.
It's a building block, literally and figuratively, that you can, point to in the 26 class and say, hey, you know what? We didn't get that guy in 2025, so we got him in 26. And now in 26, now we can say, hey, every year at least we got to get one of those. And ideally you say 2. And again, the problem is TI Umu-Cais don't come along very often. It's hard to find some of those men, especially in your region-ish of the country, being on the West Coast or western part of the United States, shall we say, west of Texas. That's why he's so important, because this is, calling Tristan Gibbons or calling somebody else, but it's like, hey, it's already out of your traditional footprint. It's kind of just a bonus. That's one thing. It's when a guy is closer to you, or in the state of California or Colorado in this case, like those are the guys that, if you're Washington, being top 3 isn't necessarily as good as you might think it is. It's like you have to get those guys more often than not.
Oh, absolutely, Lars. That was a lot of fun, but I really think that what Ryan Walters and John Richardson are doing with this secondary is also really fun to just watch develop. And we'll get to that right after a message from our friends over at Monarch Money. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. One of the things that I noticed when I started using Monarch is I was spending a lot of money on not only food delivery, but sports cards as well. And now with Monarch, I'm doing a much better job of managing my money to make sure that I can afford things like going on the road to Husky football games this year, because I think that this season is going to be an absolute blast. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKDOWNCollege at monarchmoney.com, 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKDOWNCollege for half off your first year. Lars, as we look at this class of defensive backs, we're not going to go into any hypotheticals with this, as we love to do it at different points in time on this here show, where we're not going to say, if Celesi Moa or Davon Benjamin or even Rajon Duncan, if one of those guys commits to this class, this is why it's going to look that way. We might, talk about why it's such a selling point for some of those guys. But I look at this class and I'm so intrigued by it, where I'm going to throw 4 names at you right now, and I want you to tell me what they have in common. Gavin Day, Ksani Jiles, CJ Lavender, and Jeron Jones.
Up until the last one, they're all from different states, but they all can play multiple positions in the secondary.
Yes, that's exactly where I wanted to go with this, is all of those guys are just sort of hybrids in one way or another. If Jones plays inside, like at nickel corner and on the outside, I'm not going to be shocked. If Lavender and Jiles play a little bit of nickel, a little bit of safety, not going to be shocked. If Gavin Day plays safety and linebacker, I'm not going to be shocked. And this is something where we go back through Ryan Walters' track record, especially his time at Illinois, and then some of his time at Purdue as well, where, you look at the success of Dylan Tiedemann. It's Ryan Walters plans his defense around 2 things, where you absolutely have to have some game-wrecking defensive linemen. I point to Johnny Newton specifically during his time at Illinois, and then Nick Scorton was really good during his time at Purdue. But you also need impact players in the secondary that can do a variety of things. Like, Devon Witherspoon is a guy we always point to in terms of what he was able to do defending the run, blowing up screenplays, and just being locked down in man coverage. But I also think that somebody who's just as important to talk about in that same light is Sidney Brown, where he's somebody who played a little bit of corner, played a little bit of safety during his time at Illinois. And Ryan Walters does such a good job getting his safeties involved and just putting them in positions to make a lot of tackles. Where one of my bold predictions for the season, I'm spoiling it now, is if CJ Christian is this team's leader in tackles, I'm not going to be shocked. And I'll dive into that way more as we, go on. But I think that's one of the things where I look at this class of defensive backs and people are going to say, why are you taking so many? And it's not just that 5 guys are graduating at the end of the season, but this defensive scheme relies very heavily on a large crop of versatile defensive backs who can, more importantly than anything outside of coverage, can tackle in space. And that's something that when you look at why those defenses succeeded at Illinois, it's you're not giving up big plays. All of these corners and all of these safeties are really, really good at tackling and winning those one-on-one battles.
And for every reason you just said, to build off and kind of make your point even more, it's almost Ryan Walters potentially planting his flag at Washington, because the reason why you're doing this and taking this many guys is it's in high school. They're out of high school. You're doing this to mold them for 3, 4, 5 years, not just try and go to the transfer portal and say, we want to get that guy. We want to get this guy because this other program coached him up, or that other school made him good, and we just want to, get him for 1 or 2 years. No, you're getting them for 3 or 4 years because you're going to develop them. That's the whole point of this. And so when you're talking about taking so many guys, it's like, yeah, but if they all fill the bill, that's good. And I mean, at one point we were talking about Dre Pollard being on defense. And by the way, throw him as the ace guy in on this mix. When you're talking about hypotheticals, I know, but it's like there's so many. And that's the importance of high school recruiting with this. I think that's why you're building it through the high school ranks, where you can go and if let's say you get, I know you didn't want to do hypotheticals, but you get a Davon or you get a Jeron Jones, and then you pick wherever CJ and Ksani line up. That's a good problem to have, where you're not wondering, did we get enough guys? No, that's clearly not going to be the problem. And by the way, in 2 years, 3 years, if some of these guys transfer out, 1 or 2 guys transfer out, that's fine, because for various reasons they can transfer out. So you're not looking at that and saying it's a bad thing. It's we're going to get as much talent as we can in the room within what Jedd wants to work with.
Yeah.
And just let them figure it out, because we believe. And one thing that we have repeated many times on the show, not the development, but the process that the staff works with in finding talent and kind of, conjuring, being the first to offer, being the first in on a lot of these guys. Like, you trust the development, and there's a word that I'm missing here. The evaluation. Thank you. You trust the evaluation of the staff and thinking, okay, if they think he can play, worth giving it a shot. Even if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. That doesn't mean there was a bad evaluation. It just means, they take the bulk and let it sort itself out.
So to your point on evaluation, for anybody who might be wondering why Rajon Duncan came on an official visit, just go watch his film. Their evaluation of him is phenomenal, spot on. It's incredible. Love everything that was going on with that. But I like where you're going with that, because it is just, there's so many different things in this defense that are based around flexibility and versatility and creating success, because, every player is unique and every player is going to do something a little bit different than somebody else. And, we look at it at linebacker, and it's like, I look at a guy like Zadrius Raney-Saleh. That's not somebody who's going to be a pure inside linebacker for his entire career. I don't think he's going to be a pure outside linebacker either. You find ways to put him in the best position to succeed. And if there's any, if there's one trait that I would take away from Ryan Walters' career as a coach, not only, as a head coach, but as a defensive coordinator, as a position coach, it's he has found ways to put players in the secondary, especially, in the best possible positions to succeed. And, it might look a little weird right now. And, we're not saying this to say, oh, hey, this is why you're not taking defensive linemen. No, these two things are completely unrelated. We just wanted to talk about something that is a little bit different than that. And I think it's something where people might look at that and people might have those questions and say, why do you have 5 defensive backs committed and 1 defensive lineman? Again, not, remotely in the same boat here. But it's something where when I look at this defense, I think that not only does he deserve the trust of the fan base because of what he was able to put together at Illinois, which was the number 1 defense, not just in the Big Ten, but in the nation, which was based just, primarily around a lot of really good pieces in the secondary. And again, you had a game-wrecking defensive tackle that went in the second round of the NFL draft, and that is important. And, maybe that's Javon Parker when he comes back. But, I like this rotation on the defensive line a lot. But I look at the back end of this defense, and there are so many things that I think, oh, this is going to be a positive. That's going to be positive. To bring it back to something you said earlier, I think John Richardson and Taylor Mays being part of this is something that can't be understated either.
Absolutely. I think, again, it always comes together, where everything with Jedd's circle seems to actually work ironically in a triangle, where there's always somebody kind of connecting the dots, no matter how you shape it. And I think Ryan Walters is the perfect guy for that, because one thing he always says is, we're going to put the best 11. I know it's a coaching cliche. I'm sure we've heard it from many coaches, but you truly can see it. And the proof is in the pudding with Ryan Walters' defense, where they play the best 11 guys. It might not be, a 3-3-5 or a 5-1-5 or a 4-2-5, whatever you end up calling it is what Ryan Walters doesn't necessarily care. And he's, kind of jokingly in a way, pushed back when we got to meet him in the spring. And it was like, hey, I know we've heard some 5-1-5 talk, and it might be, but, it's going to be multiple. And I think the whole point of multiple is then why you go and get multiple body tests, why you go and get multiple guys at the same position, because it's like, you don't want to look back 18 months from now and say, ooh, we got to go back in the portal, or we got to go back and do this. Well, you can't go back, and the portal is real hit or miss. At least you can trust your evaluation in high school. There's an easier – what's the line Jedd used? He's like, you recruit high school kids for, 4 years. You recruit high school, transfer portal guys for 4 minutes. And it's, it's almost like speed dating. And sometimes you hit, sometimes you don't. We'll find out how, certain guys are this season with CJ now, and we trust the evaluation there. But you just look at it and think, on the level, on a year-in, year-out basis, same thing where we do talk about the D-line, reload it in the high school ranks. Whether you're taking more than you would think, better to have more and let that problem sort itself out on the practice field than to get out on the practice field like last spring and realize you don't have a ton of offensive linemen for various reasons. And it's like, hey, make sure the coverage are never buried in any one position. This would be a prime example of that in secondary.
Yeah, exactly. That's a phenomenal point to hit on to end there, where it's, if you're playing a lot of base, I've seen some pretty funny jokes in terms of, the recruiting problems of, are you going to play like a 2-0-9 at some point moving forward with like 9 defensive backs in the field? And I think that's pretty funny, but it's one of those things where, no matter who you're playing, if you trust whatever defensive back you want to throw in there to go out there and tackle and be part of run support, is that necessarily the most ideal situation you want to be in? No, not necessarily. But if it works, and that's the overarching point that I wanted to make sure we hammered home here, is we've seen Ryan Walters' defenses work in the Big Ten at a very, very high level before. And if this is the route that he wants to go down, because let's be real, when we talk about what his role is on this Husky staff, it's to be the head coach of the defense. It's very much the Sean McVay back in the day with the Rams when Wade Phillips was the defensive coordinator. It is very much I'm going to control the offense. I'm going to let you just take the reins of the defense and you go for it. And because we've seen it work so far, I think it's fair to give him the benefit of the doubt there and see what he ends up just coming up with for that side of the ball. But Lars, that's all we got for today. As always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to everybody who's tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming through for you throughout the offseason. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast. So that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so don't miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please, if it's 5-star reviews, it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Friday.